Alright, now in the last video we were going over a lot of the basics on how this project is constructed, kind of like the different viewport things we're going to turn on eventually, the end goals, what that final video is going to look like. So what we're going to do is go through this pretty much together, just from start to finish, because there's quite a bit of information we're covering that's all new, and we're going to treat this more of like a tutorial rather than expecting you guys to figure out every step on your own. Now what we're going to do is, just looking at the documentation, one of the very first things is let's get the render settings out of the way and get the resolution set up. In the render settings, we're going to open this up, okay, and then we're going to scroll down, same area that you've done before in the last assignment. We have our HD 540 preset, 960 by 540. We need to change this to 1024 by 1024. Which is also the 1K square preset. So if you end up just picking the 1K square preset, it'll do the exact same thing. So exact same width and height, a 1:1 aspect ratio, meaning it's going to be a perfect square image once it's finished. Now in order to see this, we want to get the camera created. So now we're going to go to Create Cameras, Single Point Camera, click. We can see it says Camera 1 over here. We're going to double click on that. Let's rename it. Okay, it's going to be Frederick Cam. Okay, and now we want to look through it. So how do we do that? Remember that we're currently looking through perspective. We go to the panels menu at the top of the viewport, click Perspective, Frederick Cam. This is where we choose our different perspective cameras. This is the new one we made. We're going to click on that. Now it looks kind of weird because, just like we've seen before, when you make a new camera, it's probably being created at the origin of the scene, which could be inside of the model. So we're going to use Alt right mouse button and drag. This is the zoom and pull back. It's going to pull that back more and more, right? Now we're outside of the model. I'll use Alt middle, move up, Alt right, we're going to pull back. And you don't have to, I mean, you can still move the camera around a little bit if you want, but just make sure you can see the full character. Use your viewport controls, move that out of the center. And then we're going to turn on the resolution gate for the camera. So this is going to be turned on for the Frederick Cam, but if I go back to perspective, notice how it's not turned on. So remember that perspective camera is our working camera. This is just us moving around in 3D, clicking on things, setting keyframes, moving objects around, whatever we have to do. This is a separate camera that we're going to use for the shot. Okay, so we've got resolution set. We've got the camera created and renamed, resolution gates turned on in the viewer. And what we're going to do is center it just like this. Okay, and I just want to go over some of the issues and things we're going to run into trying to get this animation to work. So let's go back to, let's do a split view for a moment. We're going to click on the left. And okay, so when I went to split, it looks like my perspective view is turned on all the settings. Not a big deal. We're just going to turn that off. If yours doesn't do that, you're totally fine. But I noticed for whatever reason, my perspective view wanted to enable all this stuff. We're going to go to, I kind of like having the perspective on the left. I'm going to make this one the Frederick Cam. Yeah, so really what I want you to see here is just what this currently looks like. Okay, so there's my camera that we're looking through right here, looking towards the model. And I'm going to click on the camera, and just to make this a bit easier for me to see, I'm going to make the scale on the camera icon 5. So I'm just going to click on that camera, change the scale values over here to 5. It's going to make the icon a little bit bigger. Again, just so it's easier for us to see it when we're working on this thing in a little bit. Now, the tricky part is getting the camera to do an orbit. It's not quite as easy as you would think. So the trick with an orbit is you want this camera to do almost like a circular path around the character. Okay, so perfect path around the character while always facing inward. Now usually when this is pulled off for a real like in the real world on like a set where they're filming something for like a TV show or a movie, orbits are typically set up with a camera on rails, and the rails literally just snap together, and the camera's on these little cart. It stays on the rails. The rails are built so it goes around whatever they're trying to film. But in this case, we're not going to build rails. What we're going to do is use a couple tricks with groups and pivot points to get the exact same effect. So this is going to build off a little bit of what we did last week in 1.3 when we were talking about some of the transform tools and using groups. And I talked a little bit about pivot points, not too much, but that is something we're going to finally use today for this activity. So let's try to build that. With this camera, what I'm going to do is click on it. Okay, we're going to do Control G, which is going to make a group. So again, you're going to click on the camera, do Control G for group. You can also click right here in the edit. You should notice it says Group 1. If you hit the plus next to it, there is a camera inside of it. Group, camera. Okay, so there's two things now. The camera is inside of this little group, which you can kind of think of like a folder. Just minimize that again. Okay, now what we're going to do here is let's label this. Let's call this animation group. Now the reason why we're setting up the group is because if I have the group selected and hit W, I want you to notice where the manipulator is popping up. So what's happening here? Well, you can see there's a grid turned on right here in the viewport. It's a little hard to see, but you probably can see that now in the video. There's a grid. So the group, when you make it, a group is still like another object or a light. It has its own transform information. It has rotation, scale. You can move them around. So because this is a new asset, and if we put something inside of it, even though the camera's transform information is still, of course, on the camera, the group that we put it in has its transform information defaulting to the center of the world. And this is actually a good thing, because now that the group's pivot point is at the center of the scene, what I'm going to do is just back up, because I want you to see what this looks like. Hit E for rotation, then we're going to spin this with rotate Y. So we're going to click on the group. We have our rotate tool turned on. Click on rotate Y and just move it. I want you to notice that when you're doing this, you should be seeing that on the other view. You're looking through the other camera. You can tell that we're spinning around that pivot point by rotating the group. The camera is basically doing an orbit, and I can go all the way around. That's essentially going to be the movement we're going to create for the final shot. So it does 360 degrees, where it eventually meets back up where we want it. So let's hit undo. Now, if you can also just click on the group and put 0 back in the rotation. Now, before we get into any keyframing, what you want to do at this point is just take a moment with this other viewer over here. And if you're using a single view, that's also fine. I'll go back to the single and just look through that. But just make sure when you're looking through your camera that you've got your Frederick cam exactly where you want it. So I'm just going to use Alt middle, Alt right. You can push it in a little bit. Try to get it framed so at least the whole character is definitely in the view. Don't get too close like this, or too far back where there's just like an awkward amount of space. And I think you're probably going to want to have the starting point be relatively head on. You could try doing it at an angle, but either way, we're going to make it loop and restart somewhere. So I would definitely at least try to pick something relatively close to looking at the front, nothing awkward like this where it's looking from the back. I'm just going to do that real quick. We're going to look at my rotation values over here as well, because sometimes if you have the camera selected, it'll give you like a rough idea of where your rotation's at. And if I wanted to, I could even click on the camera, drag through rotation and hit 0 just to reset any weird tilts or turns I had. And then I can use Alt middle and then just transform it over to the center again. So this is probably pretty close to being a centered shot right now. There's no rotation values. Even if you have some very slight ones, that's still totally fine. We're not really grading you on having the exact same match, but this is kind of a nice way just to verify that we're definitely looking head on, because again, the camera doesn't say there's any rotation at all. It's mathematically perfect, pointing forward towards Frederick. Okay, so we've got that set up. We're going to go back to split, and let's just again set this up, or maybe want perspective here, Frederick on that side. So just take a moment to get those set up again so you have perspective and your Frederick cam. And if you click on the group, just make a note that, again, if we do rotate Y, you should see that this updates over here on this side. And I do want to show you one other thing here, just in case you're noticing that this is not updating. Sometimes when you're doing rotation, when you click, it doesn't actually pop until you release your mouse button. So there is one more thing I do want to show you guys. we're going to go into the Maya preferences. Now, there's a few ways to go in there. You can go up here to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Preferences. Okay, this is bringing up the default Maya preferences. There's a lot of different categories here. There's one down here we're going to use called Time Slider. But I also want to show you something else. If you're looking at your time editor down here, to the right of that, where you have like all the play, the reverse, play forward, hop to different keyframes, there's a button down in the bottom right corner called Animation Preferences. We're going to click that. What this does is it's a shortcut that will take you into the Maya preferences, but specifically it takes you to the time slider attributes, which is all this stuff like the frame rate, how does it update, your frames per second. And one thing you may want to double check, and this could be something you've already changed before if you've done some basic animation, there's an update view set to active or all. You could try setting it to all if you notice that you're having issues where one of the viewports is only updating and the other one is not. So I actually may recommend doing that. Let's go to update view all, and then we'll say save. That may not make a big deal, but we're going to do that just to be safe, to make sure that when I do hit play, eventually do the animation, I know both viewers are going to try to play through that animation sequence. Now, I'm going to show you one other small thing here we're going to be careful about, because we're very close to being able to keyframe it. So remember how the rotate Y is orbiting, rotate Y in the group is orbiting that camera, right? It's moving around that group's pivot point at the center of the scene. But I want you to see what this looks like when I have the lights turned on. So in this camera, I'm just going to turn on texture, light, shadow, ambient occlusion. We're not going to worry about the anti-aliasing for this one because that one's a little bit, it can be kind of slow for the computer to calculate. But I just want to get these turned on first. And I want you to watch what happens when I try to rotate this. Just watch this view right here. So notice how the camera's moving, but watch the lights. See how they're not moving? Now, it's fine, it's static lighting, but it might be kind of nice if we had the lighting move with the character. Okay, so right now the lighting is static. We're seeing little highlights change, but the light isn't moving. And one thing it does kind of help, and I'll show you this in the video again. Let's bring this in. Is occasionally when you get a really good light setup on a character, like rim lights, key lights, you get them in a really good spot, you sort of wish that that same light setup looked good from all angles, because you're going around the character and you may have built the lights according to that first initial frame, and then as soon as you move the camera behind the character, things are too dark, you're not getting all the same illumination. So we're going to also have the lights follow the camera. So it's not just the camera doing an orbit, the entire light rig is moving with the camera. So everything is spinning, lights and cameras together, to give us a little bit of a better presentation, regardless of what angle we're looking at from the camera. So hopefully that makes sense. How do we do that? Okay. Right now it's not, but you noticed how, again, this group is really the key to everything. As long as we can get everything in the group, and I rotate this, let me just reset that group's rotation back to 0 again. Let's reset it. What I want to do is get the light group, which is all these guys, all the lights. We're going to get those in this group. That way, when I keyframe it and rotate it, the lights move with it. So this is probably one of the trickier things you're going to have to do, getting used to grouping and ungrouping and moving things around in the outliner. So of course, make sure you have the outliner open. You probably do already at this point if you're following along. But with the outliner open, I want you to hit the plus next to animation group, just so you can see that it's open. There's a camera inside of it. Click on the light group above it. So this is going to select all the lights inside of it. We're not clicking on individual lights, we're just clicking on the group. Just minimize that again. So we have the light group selected. What I want you to do is, with this selected, hold down your middle mouse button. Now when you hold down middle mouse button, you are basically selecting the group and trying to currently move it in the outliner. So Maya's waiting for you to move your mouse because it's going to change where this group is positioned inside of here. So I still have my middle mouse button down. and we're going to middle mouse drag it over the word animation group and release. And you'll notice that now this animation group has the other group inside of it. You should notice there's a little line connecting there. So you can see where that goes down. There's this group in it and the camera. And if you open and close it, you can see all those things are inside of it. Now, just in case you misdrag it, you thought you middle mouse dragged it to the right spot, but it didn't go inside the group, you can still fix it. If you middle mouse drag this up, I'm going to kind of break this so it's outside of the group again. Anytime you middle mouse drag on anything, like I can middle mouse drag over background geo, see how a little plus popped up? This is now inside of the background geo object. So that object is now also controlling the light group. If you want to fix it, middle mouse drag it. Instead of putting it over one of those assets, like another group, the holdout geo, the texture group, if you get between two items where it forms a line and release middle mouse button, it will pop out and it's just going to be at the root of the outliner. And again, I'm going to try to move that inside the animation group, middle mouse drag it down over the word animation group, release. Now this group has the lights and the camera inside of it. And so to show you this, if I were to now click on the group, hit E and rotate it, watch this and watch what's happening in 3D. See how everything is spinning? Let's just kind of look from above. They're all together. And now we're getting lighting that looks basically the same from the back as it did from the front. We always have our key lights, rim lights, fill lights, all these little like fun purple accents. They're following the camera to make sure it looks good from every angle when we eventually do the play blast. Okay, let's just click on the group. Go back to rotation of Y on the channel box, hit 0, enter, just to reset it back. So feel free to do this in stages. If you do mess it up, you can always go back and restart it, open up the original file, and eventually you will get this built, but it should look like there's an animation group, camera, light group. You've got the basic light rig set up and animation rig all working. And then in the next video, we can finally get into the animation process of setting our keyframes and then doing the final play blast and video out of Maya.